likely in the future. So what are we talking about today? Today we are talking specifically about the product page and what we like to call our product page conversion formula. So today you've got both myself as well as Eric, who's our head of optimization here at Blue Stout. And we're going to be covering a very simple framework that we use when we are first starting designing and launching product pages. So the idea here today is we want to sit down and we want to talk about what's a good starting point when you are launching a product page, when you're thinking about launching a new product, when you are looking at your existing product page and you know there's opportunity. Where do you start? What's the framework you should be beginning with in terms of understanding how to turn that into something that is going to put you in the best possible position to then convert a new visitor or a new buyer to your product or to your brand? And so that's what we're going to talk about here first today. We're going to outline that framework, a very simple framework that we like to use when we design product pages. And then what we're going to do is we're going to transition and we're actually going to look at a couple product pages of some existing brands. And Erica is going to help us. Now, we're using the term tear down, that's maybe too negative. Really just more of an assessment to show you kind of what they're doing very well, what's some things that they could potentially work on that align with this framework. The piece that I always like to give when we talk about sort of design and we talk about optimization is at the end of the day, obviously we don't have the analytics behind these product pages today. Our preference would be to do a deep dive into their analytics to really understand how consumers are moving with the site, what traffic channels they're coming from, really understanding the intent of the purchase, etc. Without that information, we're really going to be basing this mainly upon our framework of best practices today, but it's going to help you understand how to apply the framework to your site as well. But if we were talking to any of you guys live today and looking at your brand specifically, the first question would be asked is let's take a look at analytics and let's make sure we understand how consumers are moving the way through the site first. So that's sort of my caveat to all this today. So first, let's talk about the anatomy of a high converting product page. We're going to talk about the two stages of every purchase decision. That is the basis of our framework. We're going to do a live teardown, and then we want to leave a little bit of time here at the end for some live Q&A. So if you guys do have questions about the framework, have questions about the sites we've torn down, if you even want us to take a look at your product page, we're happy to do that today as well. We want to try to keep this to within 30 minutes so that way we're not eating up your entire day. So let's jump straight into it. Also, what I'll call out to at the end is for everybody who does stick around, we do have an offer for everybody who sticks around. We'll talk about it at the end, but it's an opportunity to get Eric and I to both take a look at your analytics and take a look at your site and provide a full site audit of what we'd recommend improving. So there's an opportunity to do that here at the end, and we've got a sort of special offer just for folks that are attending and watching this video. Okay, so let's talk about the product page conversion formula. And Eric, if you want to go into the next slide, we can just jump straight into it. So there's a framework that we utilize, and this is based upon well-known consumer psychology. There's a lot of data that backs this up. We're not just making this up, but it is a framework that we have taken and applied to our design principles. And we call this the emotion plus logic framework. And at the end of the day, what it means is that all consumers, no matter what they're buying, and whether you realize it as a buyer or not, you are also going through this process. But you make purchase decisions in what is essentially two very distinct stages. And most of this is happening very subconsciously. The first is emotion, meaning you are emotionally drawn to the product, either because you desire it, you wanted it for a long time, or you see it and there's something very compelling about it. Maybe you see somebody else who has it and there's a sense of almost jealousy about it. Or maybe it's a product that just solves a need. It's a problem there that you have to solve, and this product specifically solves that problem. So you have an emotional connection to it for that reason. Every purchase you make, and whether you think you do it or not, there's always going to be a component of an emotional reason or connection with that purchase. That's step one, and every buyer is always going to go through that stage. Step two is what we call logic. And this is essentially you or the buyer, whomever it may be, right, is trying to then logically justify that emotional decision. And again, this happens very quickly, or it can take multiple periods of research. It all just depends on the product and the person, but they're always going to go through these two stages. And that logical justification is going to be you asking very specific questions. We'll talk about those questions in a minute, that are either going to talk you into that emotional decision or they're going to talk you out of it. And some people have a more tendency to talk themselves into decisions. A lot of people have a tendency to talk themselves out of it. And the idea is we want to craft product pages that cater to both the emotional, the first stage of the decision, and then also deeply understands what are the logical questions that your specific buyer is going to ask about your specific product or your brand that is going to move them forward and talk them into buying and talk them into moving forward with that emotional decision they've made versus talking them out of it. And so this is the very simple framework. So let's talk about sort of what comprises these both two individual stages. So emotion is probably the easiest to understand. All of us have been in a position where we've walked by a store, we scroll through Instagram, whatever it may be, and we see something that we want. Emotional desire, right? I think it's pretty easy to sort of comprehend that first stage. But the idea is for your particular brand, we want to understand what it is that's driving that emotional connection for your buyer and for your product. And that's the first step, is understanding for what you sell, what is going to drive that emotional decision. If it's a handbag, a women's handbag, right? It could be brand, it could be styling, right? It could be function. Lots of different things are going to drive that. If it's something that's more technical in nature, like a piece of equipment, like you're walking through Home Depot and trying to find a new drill, right? That's going to be more about utility, about price point, things like that are going to drive that emotional connection because it solves a problem. So the idea is we need to understand first for your audience and your product, what's going to bring in that emotional draw. And then we can start to leverage different assets to help heighten that emotional connection on the product page. And Eric, if you want to go to the next slide. And this is just sort of a couple very, very basic examples. When you're thinking about leveraging emotional connection, it's going to really come down to things like imagery. So visuals, whether it's imagery or video, what can we use to create a much more heightened experience, especially online digitally with your product that's going to create that emotional desire. So think like big, bold imagery, well-crafted video, imagery that's going to help a consumer visualize utilizing that product in what's like a better version of their life. So everybody at the end of the day, when they visualize a product they want to buy, they're essentially visualizing a future state where they're living this better version of their life with your product, either because they want it and it makes their life better, or they desire it because it solves a problem in their future state. How can we put that buyer in that future state using things like video and imagery to heighten that emotional connection? Sales copy, right? Talking about benefits of a product. So focusing on benefits in future state versus features of a product. Things like iconography, things that are going to showcase if maybe it's a nutritional, supplement product, something along those lines, highlighting the key features and benefits of the product visually so that they're easier to consume. So if somebody comes to a page, it's just a block of text, even if that copy is amazing, they're not able to grasp all the individual components that are going to heighten desire if they have to read everything. So how do we make it more visual? So this kind of gives you an idea of how we think about the framework when we're launching product pages. Is we want to utilize as many of these components, and these are just a couple examples, to heighten the emotional state. So let's talk about the second stage of the purchase decision process, and this is logically. And this is where I think most brands understand, at least brands that have taken the time to develop branding and really think about their visuals that are selling to consumers. They know the importance of imagery and video and content. But I think where a lot of brands miss this key step is then understanding that while that emotional connection and desire has been created, that buyer is then going to have to justify it. And that barrier to justification is different based on the product and based upon the buyer. If it's a really highly technical product, or if it's a really high price point product, it's going to have a higher logical barrier that you're going to have to overcome to get somebody to purchase it. So one, all of this depends on your product and your audience, but the framework we use to start with would be to say, how do we help that consumer answer the key questions that they are going to ask, that they need to have the right answers for in order for them to move forward with that emotional decision? And we break this down into a very simple framework that we call the 3 Ps. They're going to ask very specific questions about the product. They're going to ask questions about the process and questions about perceived risk. And so what does that mean? So questions about the product. So let's go back to like the handbag example. This could be, what are the materials? What are the sizing, right? How is this going to look, right, when it's delivered to me? I can see it in the photo, but really, what's the quality of the material? So they're going to have questions about that are product specific. Then they're also going to have questions that are process specific. And process could mean, what happens when I buy this? Meaning, how long does it take to ship? Can I return it? Do I get a full refund? Do I get exchanges, right? So those are more sort of very basic process questions. But it could also be, how do I care for it, right? Can I wear it immediately? Let's say I buy a pair of shoes, like a really nice pair of hiking boots. Like, how long does it take to break them in? I'm actually going on a trip next week. If I buy these this week, will they get shipped in time? And will I have time to break them in before I use them, right? These are all consumer questions that they're going to ask that are going to talk them in or out of buying your product. So what you have to do is sit down and understand, for your product, what are the process related questions that you need to answer, and answer in a way that's going to move that consumer forward with their purchase. And then finally, what we call perceived risk of purchase. And the reason why we call this perceived risk is because at the end of the day, you know there's no risk to buying your product. You back it up. You love your product. You know it's good. You know it's high quality. But for a first-time buyer, they don't. And so there's always going to be a level of perceived risk with any first purchase you make, and the higher the price point, the higher level of perceived risk. And so what we need to do is we need to, one, understand for your product, what is at the root of that perceived risk, right? For something like a supplement product, it could be ingredients. Does this really work? If it's a piece of furniture, it could be like, if I get this shipped out to my house and it doesn't work, am I gonna have to pay a whole bunch of money to get it shipped back? What if it doesn't look good next to my furniture, right? So there's a lot of perceived risk that's come into play. And also, if you're an unknown brand that hasn't been around for a long time, or maybe you're not a household name, which most early stage brands are not, you're gonna have to overcome that initial just perceived risk of buying for the first time from somebody that you have never purchased from before, or maybe even you don't know anybody who has bought from them before. So utilizing assets like everything that ranges from testimonials to different levels of social proof and press, UGC content, thinking about money back guarantees and warranties in a way that's going to move people forward with purchases, making sure you're clearly explaining your policies around things like shipping and returns, etc. All of that is going to come into play and be very, very, very important when you are reducing the perceived risk of purchase for a first-time buyer. So I know that was a very quick overview of the framework, but the idea here is, what we want to do today is give you guys a base so that when you are thinking about launching a brand new product or redesigning your product page, you're not just looking at the competition and saying, hey, look, what do they do? Or looking at the hottest new site design that just launched and saying, let's copy what they did. Let's actually have a base framework around how we should be thinking about our product, our consumer, and utilizing this framework to start designing and launching product pages. So that is the framework that we utilize to start with. And then obviously, once we design and launch product pages, we want to go through and run A/B testing and optimization, dial those in and increase performance over time, which is a whole nother conversation, another training that we can do at a later date. But what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and sort of hand the baton over to Eric. And what we want to do is actually show you just a couple examples of product pages and talk about a few elements that they're doing really well and a few elements that we think they could work on, and sort of tie that a little bit back to the framework we just talked about today.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. So I pulled together a few just quick examples. The first one, and neither of these, to kind of build on what Alan mentioned, neither of these are clients nor anyone that we have any of their actual quantitative data. So all of these recommendations are just going to be based on some of the best practices that we've established through all of our years of A/B testing and optimizations. The first one is going to be, let me pull this over. So these guys, I don't even know how to pronounce it, OTAA or OTA. It's a tie company. I was recently shopping for a tie for a wedding. So I came across this site, thought they had some neat stuff going on. So I thought they'd be a fun candidate to take a look at for their product page. A few things that I think this page does really, really well. So they have a very small, just most popular badge right here. This is a really common element, but most of the time we see the application of what I call a thematic badge like this only living on the collection pages or product listing pages. So chances are your product detail page attracts a lot more traffic than your collection pages do. So why not communicate the popularity of an item or the fact that it's new or a staff pick right at the point of purchase? I think that really speaks to some of those emotional benefits of the brand. How are we making that connection with users to let them know, hey, this is a popular item. People like you already like this item. Then, aside from the emotional look, I also take a look at the logical side. So one of the things that we're always looking for is some of the science behind user experience design. The add to cart button is, it's probably already one of the largest elements on your product page. And that's because of this 75-year-old principle called Fitts Law. It's a law of human and machine interaction that states that the time that it takes to acquire a target is simply a function of the size of that target and the distance between the cursor and that target. So that's why, that is the textbook reason why your add to bag or add to cart button is oftentimes the biggest thing on the page. But what I think these guys do in particular really well is not only is it nice and large, but it's also nice and bright. It shows up in this same kind of like primary or highlight color that they have throughout, but then they assign a distinct both user action in terms of the hover state on desktop where the shadow kind of disappears and a distinct element around it. So to help it stand out from some of the other primary items here in the same color, they give it a different shape and give it a little different action. I think that helps draw a lot of attention to it. So users can really clearly understand where is the next point in my shopping process here. Another thing a little bit farther down the page that I really like, and this is something that we have seen just really take off this year, is the incorporation of motion-based social media content into the selling process in terms of how are we incorporating that into the storefront, not just what you see on Instagram, TikTok, or whatever else. Nothing tells a story better than the combination of video and sound. So that's why this type of content is really compelling and effective at driving purchases. We've seen a lot of success, specifically this calendar year, of pulling story and reels content into the shopping process, whether that's on the homepage or here, the way that they have it on the product detail page. It's a great way to elicit some interaction as users click to open these. And it really helps pages stand out from the rest because it's not a widespread activity yet. It kind of sets you apart a little bit from the competition. And it's also a great way to make better use of the investment you're already making in all of that content that you're creating for social media. Then there's a few things where I think there's probably some opportunity in terms of where they could do things a little bit better. One thing I didn't love is just where the wish list is down here. So the wish list button is all the way down here in the add to cart button or next to the add to cart button. I'd like to see that a little bit higher on the page. I think if the user isn't quite ready to purchase, they're probably largely ignoring this section right here. But we want them to be encouraged to add items to their wish list because it gives us data, not just in terms of data that we can feed back to email lists or CPC marketing tools, but also it gives us information on their affinities. So if a user, I can see they're liking, like, if I went through this site looking for my tie and I just kept wish listing a bunch of patterned ties, then that's a good signal of my affinity of what I'm looking for, which we can then use to power product recommendations more effectively throughout the site. Another thing that just I saw as a risk here, just looking at the front end of this site, is I think they made a really interesting choice by moving like an appeals to authority here higher on the page. Legacy media outlets like a Fox News are super polarizing, whether it's Fox News or anyone else on the other side of the aisle, especially for the next 81 days here in the US. If it were me, I wouldn't take that risk. I don't want to associate my brand with either side of like these legacy media outlets because they're so polarizing at this point in time. What I would rather do is speak to the emotional benefits in a more humanistic way. And what I would do is I would just pull a snippet of an actual real user review into that same placement right there. That gives them the opportunity to take some of the verbiage that their customers have had to say about the product and really highlight that, which is a great way to also let your customers speak on your behalf, a lot of times in more like subjective terms than you would feel comfortable speaking about from a brand voice. Then another industry that we do a lot of work with is consumer packaged goods. So another site that I wanted to take a look at is this company here. And this company is a packaged goods company. They have mostly just this single product, this hydration product. And we can see right away, these guys also have, the bestseller badge here. I think that's well done. They have a customer testimonial right here, not polarizing, not trying to associate myself with anyone that people have a preconceived notion with. This is just some individual who had a nice thing to say. What I wanted to speak to on this page is specifically how they're using copy. I think you would be surprised at how impactful copy can really be. I think a lot of times we focus on user elements and imagery, and those are all really important things, but copy can truly, truly move the needle. And we see that time and time again in our A/B testing. I love the copy that these guys use. They are making a really bold claim right out of the gates, stating that they are the only of their kind. And then what they do here is they really, I think, succinctly communicate some of both the subjective elements in terms of the taste and those points of differentiation. So they're doing a little bit of both with their copy here and speaking to the emotional claims as well as some of those logical benefits of the product. When it comes to CPG, our storefronts are almost always competing with not just other brands, but with other sales channels like Amazon. So another thing that I really like these guys are doing is Amazon has these really strict image policies. Those strict policies are really our gain when it comes to the storefront, because we can do things like this. We can put a badge here, using badges like that to really communicate something like an important attribute, like the organic certification in this case. Or they even have some other items in here where they can make like a nice comparison of us versus them. Using your website to do things you can't do on other sales channels is always going to be a benefit of the lack of constraints that we have when we're developing websites. A few things I didn't like about what these guys are doing, though, is they have their subscriptions here. They're only offering 10% off on that first order. I would actually love to see that first order a little bit higher on the discount. We know really well that almost always a consumable product, whether it's something you're ingesting or putting on your skin, if it's consumable and users like it, then they're going to be really likely to stick around with their subscription. So if you can offer a little bit of a deeper discount on that first order, in most cases, we can just map out really clearly how quickly you're going to make that margin back based on your subscription stickiness and average order value for those subscription billings. Another thing that I think they overlooked is a little bit farther down the page. They have some product recommendations here, but there's no logic behind this. It's just recommending the same product that I'm already looking at. So this is probably just like a very simple, like, hey, here are our best sellers, as opposed to making this really specific to the intent and the affinity that I've shown through the signals I've created as I've navigated through the website so far. So that's a really quick teardown of a few different pages that really do things, I think, in very different categories, whether it's apparel on the tie side or this hydration powder in a CPG vertical. So with that, I'll bring it back over here to some Q&A. If anyone has questions that we can kind of go through and answer, or if there are any brave volunteers to do a teardown of your own product page.
Yep, I think we can go ahead and jump straight to Q&A. I saw a question already come through here. And so anybody else has any questions? I know that was a very quick walk through the framework and tear it down, but that's the idea, is we want to give you guys a starting point for understanding how to design product pages. Every brand is different. Every consumer is going to purchase differently. And so you do need to optimize this specifically for audience, but now you have a framework for how to think through that. What I will mention, and then we'll jump straight to QA actually, or if you want to go down one more slide, is for anybody that is attending or has attended, we are going to be offering, and this is for brands that are at least doing 100,000 in sessions a month. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for us to do the audit. But if you are a brand that is doing over 100,000 sessions a month on your storefront, and you did attend the webinar today or watching the video today, we are going to be offering a 50% discount on our actual audit package. So it's a fantastic opportunity to get both Eric and I under the hood, taking a look at your analytics, taking a look at your site, and making some very specific recommendations across the entire funnel for how you can improve not just conversions, but focusing on just revenue generation on site in general. And so all you have to do is go to bluestout.com/strategy, book a call, and we can take a look and line up an audit for you. Okay, so that is the offer, but let's jump back to Q&A. If you guys have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat and we can start to address them one by one. And Eric and I can sort of tag team this a little bit. And if there's a product page you guys want us to take a look at, we're also happy to throw it up there live. Let's see here. So Richard was asking about, can you speak to the challenges of deploying an effective product page on mobile versus desktop? And how do you think about conversion rates of those two platforms? So that's a Pandora's box of a question we could spend a lot of time talking about, but we absolutely think about them differently. And at the end of the day, it really is going to come down to a combination of, what's the product, and then also the channels in which your customers are coming from. And understanding sort of the buying preferences across both those. Somebody that's buying a $5,000 speaker system is going to have a very different preference for how they purchase than somebody who's buying a $10 t-shirt. And so at the end of the day, it is going to come down to product preference in terms of how we think about utilizing mobile to then drive a purchase. And lots of times people will come, they will use mobile very specifically for browsing, for research, maybe a lot of that sort of inspirational stage, and then they'll go to desktop to make a purchase where a lot of the logical components kick in, kind of like we've talked about. They've already been sold the product, they want it, and now they're trying to justify that decision, and they're on desktop making those decisions. And so we would want to be emphasizing a lot of the logical components much more heavily on desktop in certain cases. So that's just a very high level way to sort of think about it. Eric, what are your thoughts on desktop versus mobile strategy?
So when I think of desktop and mobile strategy, the first thing that I take a look at is your average order value, because average order value is usually an indication to me as to how methodical a user is going to need to be in their purchasing decision. Those methodical users are probably going to lean much more heavily on answers to a lot of those logical questions. So if I am able to communicate all of those things really succinctly and clearly on a mobile page, then users are going to be more likely to purchase there. But conversely, as average order values increase, we tend to see mobile conversion rate decrease. So the way that we measure that is actually that gap between your mobile conversion rate and your desktop conversion rate. That gap increases based on the size of your average order value. So we always look at those in tandem. What we'll do is we always look at, based on your average order value and where that lands in a band based on our metrics, we'll measure what your mobile is versus your versus your desktop. And we'll want to see that be within a certain band based on your average order value. And then that's how we identify how much opportunity we think there is. If it's within that band, then we will be able to say, hey, I think it's already doing a really good job of communicating all of the information that's really important to purchase on the smaller mobile screens. Or maybe we might see a larger gap there where it's a more methodical process where both experiences are serving as touch points in that user journey. So for example, a lot of times when we see a product that has a longer purchasing cycle, it takes, let's call it more than 3 visits to the website in order to create that purchase. What we usually tend to see is that mobile view of the product detail page is the first view, and then people come back on successive sessions and make those purchases on desktop. So a lot of times we'll use them both in different ways. One, as a way to really start generating some demand, knowing that they're going to come back on desktop, and then using desktop to make sure we capture that demand.
Richard, hopefully that helps answer your question. I think Richard actually shared one of their product pages too. Eric, do you have access to the chat? You want to pull that up real quick?
Take a look here. Oh, okay, cool. So let's see. Richard's got a watch company. Let me pull this up. We'll take a look at your product detail page too.
And Richard, what I'd say right off the bat before I hand it over to Eric too is that, for sort of thinking through the sort of emotion plus logic framework, specifically looking at this, I did a couple click throughs of this while Eric was talking, so I understand what the product is. But I think probably the biggest piece here is that it's, if I were to land directly on this product page, I don't think I have a really clear understanding of the problem that you're solving. And so, I know that this looks like it's a watch that helps detect sort of falls. I think for mainly built around maybe targeting more like elderly or older individuals. One, I think there's a lot more that could be leveraged here to tap that emotional component, which is, at the end of the day, this solves a real problem. This is a real pain point, and this is a scary pain point for a lot of people. And so I think there's probably an opportunity here to really, really tie into that emotional piece upon first visit, versus what I get when I first land here is really just a lot of text without a really clear hierarchy of how to consume the content.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. We want to make sure that we're making your claim similar to the that hydration example that I pulled up. Their copy really explicitly says like what they do, like we're the only organic, I think it was, hydration powder, and then they go on to speak those benefits, and they do so with really small text. So it doesn't push a lot of copy or a lot of other elements farther down the page, and it doesn't take up much of the real estate that we have either. Another thing that jumps out at me right away is just some of like the hierarchy of the messaging here too. So I've actually seen Front Row has become really popular this year, getting utilized on a lot of websites. But while I think there's value in it, the value in it is not going to supersede the value of making sure users understand explicitly like what you're offering, the problem you're solving for. And this is more of like a validation. And that's like a secondary or tertiary piece of that logical decision point. We want to make sure we make that emotional connection. Like I would have here, like pictures of, of actual users, start making that emotional connection so that people realize like, hey, is this a gift you're buying for a loved one? Like there's a true safety benefit here. And then use that order of kind of like emotion and then logical, and then those three P's. That's actually a really good starting point in terms of how to lay out each element of your homepage in descending order. So starting with kind of like the emotional and then working your way down. So I would probably put the Front Row like a little bit farther down the page, probably like in this section here, probably below the add to cart.
Cool. So we did get another product page shared from Emily from Naked Nutrition. Emily, I will say we're actually already working on an audit for you guys with James. So I don't know if you want us to share our insights live on the call. You can jump on the call that we're lining up with James and Stefan maybe. All right.
Oh, Emily gets the green light. Let's do it.
All right, green light, Emily. We'll do it. As long as you got the green light. Let's go.
1 second. Let me grab that. Okay. So for Naked, let me get rid of this. For Naked Nutrition, I think the page does a lot of things really well already. You have your reviews up here. I think that's a great place to have reviews. It communicates a lot of that like significant social proof that you guys already have. And then you have a really clear designation of like, okay, how large is the item? One thing I would wonder right off of the bat is, okay, if this is the 5-pound option, are there other options? Like, can I get that in smaller sizes? Like, what if I wanted to try, like a 1 pound just to like try it out, see if I like the taste? Maybe I want to buy a couple of these and say like, oh, I'm going to get a chocolate and a vanilla. I don't want to commit to 5 pounds. I want to see which flavor I like best. So a lot of times we'll take these like secondary attributes and either link them back up in the funnel to a collection page of, maybe just like the Naked Way, or like a little child link here that says like also available in more sizes, right? And that could take you back to a collection page that has all the different sizes for this product type. I also really like that you have the copy here. We'll just stick with that kind of like theme, right? You guys have, without taking the time to like read through this, but I really like the way that this is implemented with the read more here, because I think that allows users to first see that there's some information here. There's really kind of like two schools of thought with a product detail page that actually really is driven a lot by how methodical that user is. A lot of times we'll see, to tailor this back to Richard's question about mobile versus desktop. So when we're looking at mobile versus desktop, a lot of times we'll be thinking about these two schools of thought around a product detail page. There's the one school of thought that users have arrived on this page and they are full of intent, and all we have to do is capture that intent, get as much information out of the way because they already have everything that they need and they are ready to purchase. In that case, we want to create the fastest path to purchase. The other side of that, and this is usually for those higher average order value sites, and that we see more transaction activity happening on desktop, where we'll present a lot more information, knowing that users are arriving on this page. Maybe they don't have that intent. They're not fully sold yet. So we need to make really prominent proclamations about that emotional connection, the reasons to purchase, and logical reasons why they should purchase from us in particular. That's why I bring up this kind of like truncated product description here, because I think that does a really good job of allowing users to, if they're ready to move quickly, they can still do that. They can get to your purchasing options really quickly. But if they're not quite at that point, then they know there is some information here that they can proactively seek out. But the way that it's laid out doesn't impede people who are ready to purchase. Then let's see. I think we have time for one more if you're good with it. Alan, I can grab this
Yeah,
other
let's
one.
let's grab one more here.
Andre. So let's take a look at equine elixirs. Perfect. Okay, cool. So I feel like we already have an equestrian theme here, starting with starting with my horse tie. So this looks like a packaged good for horses. And one thing right out of the gates, like again, like we've touched on it, I think like some product copy here would be really helpful. But maybe your users are that segment of user types that subscribe to the school of thought that, okay, they already know what they want. This is like a utilitarian purchase. We don't need to convince them or sell them. They're just ready to purchase. This is simply a transactional page. If that is your audience, I think this page is doing a good job of that, because it's really easy for me to, select the size, decide if I want to boost or subscribe. Add to cart is right here. Everything is within view in terms of like the functional decisions that I need to make in order to complete a purchase. But if some or a majority of your users are not quite sold, this is a great place to communicate some reasons to purchase. So you could use some of this white space right here to maybe address some of the 3Ps with some iconography that communicates what makes the product stand out, how quickly does it provide gastric support. Some of those kind of like logical steps that a user might have or questions that they might have would be a great thing to try and answer with maybe or just a simple row of iconography right here, since there's already some white space for us to work with.
Yeah, I think that's the big call out in this page, is that if we're making the assumption that there's a certain percentage of users that are coming here that are first-time buyers, there just really isn't much here to boost that emotional connection with the product, right? It's like, okay, I can understand what it does by sort of looking at the bag, understanding sort of gastric support, but what makes you different in this space, right? Why should I buy your product versus somebody else's? What is it that makes this product more important to me than another product that does something similar? And sort of this space right above the page fold is really where we need to be capturing that attention to get them to, if there's more content, more story, to get them to scroll down and actually see the rest of that content. And that's sort of the issue. I think Andre actually is bringing this up. All the information is further down the page. So the idea here is, especially if we're thinking about sort of small device, mobile device, landings, like, I don't know, there's nothing unless I scroll, right? And there's no incentive for me to scroll. And so we want to make sure we're at least hooking people enough into the reason why they should dig deeper so that they actually go deeper.
And to build on that, I'll say too, there's a lot of great heat mapping tools out there. We tend to use Microsoft Clarity. It's free. It bolts right into your Google Analytics and is easy to install in on a Shopify store. What we tend to see on desktop product detail pages is obviously 100% of people are going to see this far on the page. Usually you'll lose another 25% on that full second scroll. And then by the time you get 2 full scrolls into the page, you've already lost half of the entire traffic. And then it starts, depending on the length of the rest of the scrolls continues to decline from there. But as a rule of thumb, I like to think of that okay, what are the items and elements that I want to communicate to 100% of the audience? Put them here. Then that secondary tranche of kind of like questions that I want to answer, they'll go here. And then anything thinking of it as like a tertiary element would go below those first 2 full page scrolls.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we took about 45 minutes. We wanted to try to keep it half an hour, so we went a little long. Anybody have any other just quick questions they want us to address? No more teardowns, but any just sort of quick questions on anything we've spoken about so far? Okay, I think that's about it for today. All right, guys. Well, first off, thanks for joining today. Again, we wanted to keep this very tight, very focused. We could spend hours and all day talking specifically about product page design, but the idea today was really to give you guys a simple framework that could be applied to any brand as a starting point. And even in the teardowns today, we wanted to give everybody, again, just sort of a little high level, focusing on sort of quick wins, really easy optimizations. End of the day, what we do for all of our clients is we do a deep dive in analytics. So we want to understand where your customers coming from, how are they moving way through the site, where are they getting stuck, really understanding who those buyer personas are and what drives a purchase, and then making much, much, much more specific recommendations that then leads to testing and optimization down the line. So if that's something anybody here is interested in doing, and you guys are doing at least 100,000 in sessions a month, which means there's enough for us to do consistent, statistically significant A/B testing, then please go to bluestout.com/strategy. For everybody on the call, we are offering half off on our audit analysis. So if you want to talk about that and see if it's a good fit for you guys, book a call and we'd be happy to chat. But other than that, thank you everybody for joining. We're going to do more of these in the future. So if you have any feedback, would love to hear it. And we will be sending out the recording of today's call